Check this out, BCM Raider here, bringing you another Commander deck tech. Today we're looking at Prossh, Skyraider of Kher. This is a all-in Jund sacrifice deck. So we're going to focus on creating a whole bunch of creature tokens that we're going to use to sacrifice to various different things and get a whole bunch of triggers that we're going to utilize with dealing damage, drawing cards, gaining life. Basically everything that we can think of. So, Prossh himself, whenever we cast Prossh, we're going to create X01 kobolds, where X is the amount of mana that was spent to cast Prossh. This is going to benefit because he's going to keep scaling every time Prossh dies with the commander text. So, the more times we cast Prossh, the more tokens we get to create. But he has a built-in sacrifice outlet where whenever we sacrifice a creature, Prossh will get +1/+0 until the end of turn. So we can sacrifice a whole bunch of creatures to make Prossh very large and take out our opponents just with commander damage. So let's get right into it. First up are all the creatures. We have 4 very specific sacrifice outlets just with the creatures alone. So we have Korvold, Fey Curse King. He's kind of like a secondary commander as well. But whenever Korvold enters the battlefield or attacks, we have to sacrifice another permanent. But whenever we sacrifice a permanent, we're going to put a +1 counter on Korvold and draw a card. Now we have Dockside Chef. We're going to activate this, sacrifice a artifact or creature, and we get to draw a card. Now we have Woe Strider. This one is very versatile. When it enters, we get to create a 0/1 goat token, but we can sacrifice a creature to scry one. We can also cast Woe Strider from our graveyard by paying 3 colorless, 2 black, and exiling 4 other cards. And when we do, he's going to enter with 2 +1 counters on it. And of course, we have Secura Tribuilder, formerly known as Steve. He has a built-in sacrifice outlet himself, and when we do, we get to search for a basic land and put it on the battlefield tapped. Now we have a whole bunch of creatures that are going to synergize with whenever creatures are put into a graveyard or enters the battlefield. So we have Blood Artist. Whenever another creature is put into any graveyard, target player will lose 1 life and we get to gain 1 life. Similar to that, we have Zulaport Cutthroat. This will only trigger with creatures that are put into our graveyard. Our opponents are still going to lose 1 life and we gain 1 life. Now we have Mayhem Devil. Whenever any player sacrifices a permanent, Mayhem Devil will deal 1 damage to any target. Now we have Pawn of Ulamog. This will only trigger if it's a non-token creature, but when we do, we get to create a 0/1 colorless Eldrazi spawn token, which has a sacrifice outlet itself, which will produce 1 colorless mana. Now we have Purphros, God of the Forge. This card is very hard to get rid of because as long as your devotion is less than 5, it's not a creature. So you can't swords it, you can't path it. But whenever another creature enters the battlefield under our control, we get to deal 2 damage to each opponent. Now we have Poison Tip Archer. This is a 2/3 with reach and death touch, so our opponents aren't really gonna try to swing at us because we're just gonna block and kill their creature. Whenever another creature is put into a graveyard, each opponent is gonna lose 1 life. Now we have Pitiless Plunderer. Whenever another creature we control is put into a graveyard, we get to create a treasure. We're going to use that mana for pretty much everything else. Now we have Ogre Battle Driver. This is going to synergize with all these creatures entering the battlefield, because this will give all those creature tokens haste and +2/+0 until the end of turn, just when they enter the battlefield. Now we have Smothering Abomination. This is a 4/3 with flying. Every single upkeep, we do have to sacrifice a creature, but whenever we sacrifice a creature, we get to draw a card. Now we have Vindictive Vampire. Whenever another creature we control is put into a graveyard, this will deal 1 damage to each opponent, and we get to gain a life. It's kind of like another Blood Artist or Zulaport Cutthroat. Okay, now we got a powerful one. We have Sir Conrad the Grim. Whenever another creature is put into a graveyard, Sir Conrad will deal 1 damage to each opponent. Or, if a creature card would be put into a graveyard, let's say by discarding or being milled, Sir Conrad will deal 1 damage to each opponent as well. We can also force everybody to mill the top card just by paying a colorless and a black. Now we have Endrick Sar, Master Breeder. Whenever we cast a creature spell, we're going to create X 1/1 black thralls, where X is that spell's mana cost. And then if we control 7 or more thralls, we have to sacrifice Endrick. But that's not going to matter too much because we can control how many actual thrall creatures we have just by sacrificing them all. Okay, now we have Butcher of Malakir. This is my favorite black magic card on a creature. That's basically Grave Pact. Whenever a creature is put into our graveyard, each opponent has to sacrifice a creature. Okay, now we got some creatures that we're gonna be able to continually get back from either exile or our graveyard. That way we can keep sacrificing them over and over and over. So we have Eternal Scourge. We can cast this from exile, and when Eternal Scourge becomes the target of a spell or ability a opponent controls, we have to exile Eternal Scourge. And of course, we have Squee, the Immortal. We can cast this from exile or our graveyard. It also pairs very nicely with a very certain enchantment. Now we have Avenger of Zendikar. This is a very large body that's going to enter the battlefield and keep bringing as many sacrifice tokens as possible. And whenever a land enters the battlefield, we get to make those plant tokens even bigger. Now we have Plaguecrafter. When this enters the battlefield, each player will have to sacrifice a creature or planeswalker, and if they can't, they have to discard. Okay, now we have Fleshbag Marauder. When this enters the battlefield, each player has to sacrifice a creature, but we're not going to worry too much about this because we're going to generate so much more value of our creatures going to the graveyard than our opponents. Now we have Reclamation Sage. When this enters the battlefield, we get to destroy an artifact or enchantment. This is going to help us if our opponents are playing like Rest in Peace or some other artifact or enchantment that's preventing us from using our graveyard. Now we have Eternal Witness. When this enters, we get to return any card from our graveyard back to our hand. Now we have Solemn Simulacrum, also known as Sad Robot. When this enters the battlefield, we get to search for a basic land, put it on the battlefield tapped, and if Solemn would be put into a graveyard, we get to draw a card. Okay, now we have some planeswalkers that are going to synergize very well with what we're doing and really going to help us out. So, first up is Vraska, Golgari Queen. This is going to enter with 4 loyalty on it. With her +2, we get to sacrifice another permanent. If we did, we get to gain a life and draw a card. Or -3, we get to destroy target non-land permanent. That's mana cost 3 or less. But if we get to -9, we get an emblem where any creature deals combat damage, that player loses the game. Now we have Xenagos the Reveler. This one is pretty good. It'll enter with 3 loyalty, but his +1, we're going to add a combination of red or green mana, where X is the number of creatures we control. The more creatures we have, the more mana we get. We can also zero him and create a 2/2 satyr with haste. And then -6, we get to exile the top 7 cards and put any number of creatures or lands from among those on the battlefield. Now we have Liliana Dreadhorde General. This one is going to synergize very well. It'll enter with 6 loyalty on it, but it has a static effect. Whenever a creature we control is put into a graveyard, we get to draw a card. We can +1 her to create a 2/2 zombie, or if we really need to, we can -4, and each player has to sacrifice 2 creatures. And -9, each opponent chooses a permanent they control of each permanent type, and then they have to sacrifice the rest of it. So they have to choose a artifact, a land, a creature, a planeswalker, all that. Okay, let's get into the enchantments. All these enchantments are going to benefit from creatures entering the battlefield, creatures going to the graveyard, allowing us to draw cards, and just really try to get as much value as possible. So first up, we have Seal of Primordium. This is going to sit out until we really need it, but when we do, we can sacrifice it and destroy target artifact or enchantment. Now we have Sylvan Library. This one is worded very strangely, but how Sylvan Library works is every single draw step, we get to draw 2 additional cards, and if we want to keep those additional cards in our hand, we have to pay 4 life for each card. But this will also allow us to put certain cards back on top of our library that we didn't need. Now we have probably the best enchantment in the entire deck. We have Impact Tremors. Whenever another creature enters the battlefield under our control, it'll deal 1 damage to each opponent. Then we have Goblin Bombardment. This is a very powerful sacrifice outlet where we can sacrifice creatures to deal 1 damage to any target. Now we have Awakening Zone. Every single upkeep, we get to create a 0/1 colorless Eldrazi spawn token that will sacrifice itself to provide 1 colorless mana. Now we have Bastion of Remembrance. When this enters the battlefield, we're going to create a 1/1 human soldier, but whenever a creature we control is put into a graveyard, each opponent will lose a life and we gain a life. This is basically another Blood Artist effect. Now we have Fecundity. Whenever any creature is put into a graveyard, that creature's controller may draw a card. Now we have Food Chain. Food Chain is really, really powerful. It's also a very powerful combo enabler because we're going to exile a creature and then we're going to add X mana of any color, where X was that creature's mana cost. We can only use that mana to cast creature spells, however, but this goes infinite with either Eternal Scourge or Squee. Because we're creating so many tokens, why not make even more of them with parallel lives? If a effect would put 1 or more tokens on the battlefield, we put twice that many instead. Now we have Moldervine Reclamation. Whenever a creature we control is put into a graveyard, we get to gain a life and draw a card. And similar to Great Pact, we have Dictate of Erebos. The only difference is Dictate of Erebos has flash. And whenever a creature we control is put into our graveyard, each opponent has to sacrifice a creature. Okay, let's get into the artifacts. We have our Soul Ring, our Arcane Signet, our Gruul Signet, our Golgari Signet, and our Rakdos Signet. These are our kind of staple mana rocks in most builds. Of course, we have Skull Clamp. Skull Clamp will allow us to equip a token that will die immediately, and when the equipped creature is put into a graveyard, we get to draw 2 cards. Now we have Lightning Greaves and Swiftfoot Boots. We're going to equip these to creatures that we don't want to die, such as, oh, I don't know, Prossh. Now we have two very specific sacrifice outlets. So we have Phyrexian Altar. We're going to sacrifice a creature to add 1 mana color. And we have Ashnod's Altar. This will only provide 2 colorless mana. When it comes to infinite combos regarding sacrificing, the more go-to one is Ashnod's Altar, because 2 colorless is more than 1 color, unless you really need that color. Okay, let's get into the instance. Not very many. We have Village Rites. This has a additional cost of sacrificing a creature, but when we do, we get to draw 2 cards. Now we got some removal. So we have Assassin's Trophy. We get to destroy target permanent a opponent controls, and then its controller can search for a basic land and put it onto the battlefield. Now we have Putrefy. This will destroy a artifact or creature, and it can't be regenerated. Now we have Bedevil. We're going to destroy target artifact, creature, or planeswalker. Okay, let's get into the sorceries. We're playing black, so of course we have Demonic Tutor, so we can go get whatever card we want. Now we have a whole bunch of ramp cards. So we have Farseek. This will search for a plains, an island, a swamp, or a mountain card, and it goes on the battlefield tapped. Now we have Kadama's Reach. We get to search for 2 basics. One of those goes on the battlefield tapped, the other one goes into your hand. This is also very good with Avenger of Zendikar or any other landfall creature. Now we have Rampant Growth. We get to search for a basic, put it on the battlefield tapped. Similar to Kadama's Reach, we have Cultivate. Now we got some very specific ones. So we have Eldritch Evolution. This has a additional cost of sacrificing a creature, but we're going to search our library for a creature card with converted mana cost X or less, where X is 2 plus the sacrifice creature's converted mana cost. Now we have Crux of Fate. This will destroy all dragon creatures or all non-dragon creatures. Most of the time, it's all non-dragon. Now we have a very powerful one. We have Rishkar's Expertise. We get to draw cards equal to the greatest power among creatures we control, and then we can cast a card with converted mana cost 5 or less from our hand without paying its mana cost. Anytime you get a free spell, it's very good value. Okay, let's get into the land base. This is a very straightforward land base, nothing crazy. We have our command tower, our mana confluence. We're going to pay 1 life and add 1 mana of whatever color we really need. Now we got some fetch lands. So we have Verdant Catacombs, Wooded Foothills, and Bloodstained Mire. Now we need the lands we're going to go get. So we have Zeator's Proving Ground. You can also cycle this if you really need to. We have our Overgrown Tomb, Stomping Ground, and Blood Crypt. Then we have our Surveil lands. So we have Rausch's Theater, Underground Mortuary, and Commercial District. These Surveil lands are so beneficial in today's Commander because if it's a card you need in your graveyard, these lands will put them there. Or if it's a card you really need to draw, it'll get the card you don't need away from the top of your library. Now we have Smoldering Marsh. These will enter tap, but they're still fetchable. Now we have Cinderglade, same thing. Now we have our Battle Bond lands. So we have Luxury Suite, Undergrowth Stadium, and Spire Garden. Now we have our check lands. So we have Rubound Crag, Dragon Skull Summit, and Woodland Cemetery. Now we have our Scry lands. So we have Temple of Malice, Temple of Abandon, and Temple of Malady. Now we have some reveal lands. So we have Foreboding Ruins and Game Trail. Now we have some very unique utility lands. We have Baradur. This one is very good because this land only cares about if a creature died that turn, and if it did, we can pay 1 black and then double X, and we can amass orcs. Now we have Kher. This will create a 0/1 kobold. These lands are very beneficial for us because they will continually generate sacrifice fodder for us. Now we have Grim Backwoods. This has a sacrifice outlet where we're going to activate it, sacrifice a creature, and then we get to draw a card. That's very powerful on a land. We have 3 swamps, 4 forests, and 3 mountains. And that was the Commander deck for Prossh, Skyraider of Kher. I really hope you guys enjoyed this all-in Jund sacrifice deck. If you guys have any suggestions, please leave them in the comments below. I'll leave the link to the Moxfield deck list in the comments below as well. Be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next one.